It is often inaccurately stated that Tsar Nicholas II was weak. In reality, nothing could be further from the truth. Physically he was strong, and he greatly enjoyed the exertion of outdoor pursuits. He showed great moral strength in his devotion to his wife and family, and in carrying out his duties in the face of great external pressures and inner anguish. Spiritually he was strong, adhering to his faith in the midst of personal sorrow and tragedy, and he had a strong intellect, speaking several languages fluently, and having a ready grasp of literature, history, and the political climate. In spite of the legendary Romanov wealth, Nicholas was raised in an atmosphere of simplicity. He might have lived in glorious palaces, but the family rooms within those palaces were sparsely furnished and far from opulent, and this simplicity continued to the end of his life. At the age of 13, he witnessed the first in a series of violent events that would continue throughout his reign. His grandfather, Alexander II, known as the Tsar Liberator for having emancipated the serfs, was on the point of introducing a constitution that would have completely reformed the government of Russia when he was assassinated. Consequently, his successor, Nicholas's father, Alexander III, believing that such violence showed that Russia was not ready for such a transformation, halted the reforms and ruled the country firmly. As he was still a relatively young man, Alexander paid little attention to training his son for his future role as Tsar. Consequently, his sudden death meant that when Nicholas inherited so vast an empire at the age of only 26, he felt completely unprepared for such responsibility. Nevertheless, supported by his wife, Alix of Hesse, he committed himself to his duties and worked tirelessly, often snatching only a few hours' sleep in his study. A series of tragedies beset his reign, beginning at the coronation, when crowds who had gathered to receive gifts and souvenirs rushed forwards in such a stampede that many hundreds of people were crushed to death. Nicholas, distraught, immediately visited the wounded and paid for the funerals of those who had been killed from his personal funds. A more personal tragedy also overshadowed him. As the Salic law prevented females from inheriting the throne, it was imperative that he should have a son. Having been married for 10 years, Alix had borne 4 daughters, all of whom were deeply loved, but no son, until at last in 1904 Alexei was born. The family and the country were jubilant, but when the baby was only a couple of months old, he was found to have inherited the terrible bleeding disease, haemophilia, for which there was no cure, and which meant that the slightest cut or knock could kill him. Alexei suffered terribly, and his parents suffered with him. But as it had been decided to keep the illness a secret, few people in Russia were aware of the enormous stress under which Nicholas and Alix were placed. At the time of Alexei's birth, Russia was in the midst of a disastrous war with Japan. That, combined with the effects of rapid industrialization and the migration of rural communities to overcrowded cities, led to a good deal of unrest. In January 1905, a huge crowd gathered in St. Petersburg, intending to take their grievances to the Tsar in the certainty that he would help them. Nicholas, unaware of the size of the crowd, was not even in the city at the time, but as the crowds moved towards the Winter Palace, the guards took fright and fired, indiscriminately killing hundreds of innocent people, including women and children. This dreadful event unjustly led to Nicholas being labelled Bloody Nicholas, and sparked a revolution in which many prominent figures, including Nicholas's uncle, were killed. Eventually calm was restored, and from 1905 to 1914 the country became calmer to the extent that Lenin complained that no one wanted revolution. During these years, Nicholas, having learned from the mistakes of the Russo-Japanese War, was more eager than ever to maintain peace. It is often forgotten that during the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913, he showed great wisdom and understanding in ensuring that the losers were not treated too harshly, lest their dissatisfaction should cause further violence. One of the accusations levelled against Nicholas was his so-called weakness in failing to execute insurgents. Far from being a sign of weakness, I believe this was a sign of his strength of character and humanity, and was a sign of his commitment to his people. He was intensely loyal, and he was also committed to his coronation oath, and though he would much rather have retired to a country estate with his family, he placed his duty before his own wishes. He was also eager to maintain peace with his neighbours, and, as will be seen in subsequent videos, to the last minute he was doing his utmost to prevent what would become the First World War.